The piece of furniture my customers request more than anything else is something I don't even make because I don't know how to work with metal, but I've always thought it would be incredible made out of wood. I've just been too afraid to try. Until now.
Oh, what's going on? This is going way too well.
The design that I'm attempting to recreate here is generally referred to as a spider table base, and I've only ever personally seen them made out of metal, and the first time I ever saw one was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I had a customer request one of these bases for a tabletop that I was building her, and I was genuinely concerned at the overall design of this base. It looked like it wouldn't be that stable, it looked like the legs might get in the way of the seating. I told her all of these concerns, and she insisted it would be fine, assumed all of those risks, and asked if I could go about sourcing one of these bases anyway. So I reached out to a metal fabricator I know named Bryson Steele, and that's actually his real name, and yes, that is like a dentist being named Crentist, but Bryson custom designed me a spider table base to fit this tabletop, and after we ended up getting it on there, it was not only shockingly stable, but the customer ended up telling me there was not a bad seat at this table, meaning on all sides and all corners you could comfortably pull a chair up and not bang your knee or shin into a table leg. And from there, this quickly became my most popular table base that customers asked for, and I think primarily because it looks freaking awesome, but secondarily because it is so functional, and eventually it even became the flagship table base on my pretentiously named Blacktail Studio signature epoxy table. The irony has never been lost on me that I am a YouTube channel where I build furniture, and a lot of times if I have a project where I'm building a tabletop and I outsource one of these steel table bases, debatably the coolest part of a project that I build is something that I just paid for, and yeah, that doesn't sit quite right with me. And it's not that I never wanted to build this out of wood, it's just that I more or less thought that it was kind of impossible, and not impossible in that someone out there couldn't do it, just more impossible in a way that I can't do it. When I was a kid, someone showed me that trick where you can't crush an egg if you put it in your palm and try to close your hand around it, and it's pretty cool if you've never done it because I really can't crush an egg that way. And I remember going home to my dad and telling him, "Did you know that it's impossible to crush an egg like this?" And he's like, "No, it's impossible for you or me to crush it." He goes, "But I've seen strong enough guys just crush it no problem." He says that that's like you telling me that it's impossible to dunk a basketball because neither of us can dunk a basketball. And that's what I mean when I say I thought it was impossible for me to build this base. Not that it was impossible for someone with enough talent, it's just that I never really knew how I could possibly build this until I actually saw it diagrammed. I had Scott, my video guy, make a kind of 3D rendering of this, and I realized it's not that complicated of a shape. It's really just two sets of parallel lines. Eventually, I'd like to have this base dialed into the point where I could offer plans that basically anybody could understand, and I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I will have these pop-ups throughout the video to let you know what piece we're working on and what angle we're using here, because I believe here this was a 44-degree cut, and that's the hardest part of this whole project, is just knowing what the angles are, and thanks to Scott, my video guy, who's also, I guess, the rendering guy, he got me all these angles, so now it's just a bunch of straight cuts. What I have here so far is essentially a base plate. This is what all the table legs are going to attach to in the end, and I'm going to be joining all of these individual sections together using a Festool domino. And yes, I am well aware that this tool is a bit of a luxury. That little thing there is like $1,000. And yeah, I'm also aware that a lot of you watching don't have one, you don't have access to one, and you can relax though, because I do have kind of a woodworking hack that worked really well for me early in my career, and that was to buy a domino. A couple months ago, I did a video where I made a woman a table because she was scammed out of $17,000 from a fake Blacktail account, and that video was all about how these scammers operate, and I even kind of went undercover online just to find out directly how they work, and that part was a lot of fun, and the whole thing was probably my best video yet, and that was the first time I was introduced to Incogni, who's also sponsoring this video, and it's been a few months since I signed up for Incogni, but since then, my spam calls have been cut way down, and I'm not challenging any of you maniacs out there to find me, but before Incogni, my name and address were on the first 5 Google results. Now they aren't. They also just launched their custom removals tool, which allows you to copy and paste links you'd like your information removed from, and before you try, this will not scrub your DUI from the county website, I've found. But if you Google yourself and you see your information on any of the hundreds of people search sites, Incogni can go to work on your behalf to get it removed. All you have to do is create an account, give them permission to do your bidding, and they take care of the rest. So if you want to help keep your information private, head to incogni.com/blacktail. The link is in the description box below, and use code BLACKTAIL for 60% off an annual plan with Incogni. You can try it out risk-free for 30 days, and if you don't like it, you'll get a full refund. This shouldn't be a particularly complicated glue up, but I am going to use some super glue to make it a little bit easier, and that's what that is there. It's got a fancy name that I don't know how to pronounce, but what I'm doing is I'm basically just gluing this offcut right onto the piece of wood, and I'll show you exactly how that'll work here in a little bit. But now just normal wood glue. This is Titebond 3. I don't know why I'm using it over Titebond 1 or over epoxy here. It's just kind of what I ended up gravitating towards. And now for the clamps, those ones were easy enough. I could get those on the corner, and then I just needed to kind of offset it by putting another one on that corner. For this other angle though, this is where I'm going to use that offcut, and that's going to mean that I could just clamp straight down and not have any kind of funky twist to it. I needed to cut some exceptionally steep angles for these long table legs, 63 degrees, and I actually had no idea how to do this because my miter saw maxes out at 60 degrees, and I was pretty concerned about this because I didn't know how I could do this accurately until finally I did a quick YouTube search and realized there's about 200 videos that show a really simple method to do this, and this is that method. First thing I did is I had that kind of scrap block there and I cut a 45. Now 45 degrees is essentially the new 0, and I moved the miter saw over to 18 degrees, which should be 63 degrees, and this ended up being very easy and very repeatable. But if some part of this didn't quite make sense, just rewind it and watch it again. I explained it perfectly. I'm not certain that I'm building this the easiest way imaginable. When I line things up with a tape measure, mark it with a pencil, and cut it with a miter saw, there's gonna be some inherent variation between these legs, and I really need them to be as close as possible to each other to being exactly the same. And if I was to do this again, and I'm sure I will do this again, I might try building one template out of MDF and then just copying it with a router, and that will probably be a little bit more time consuming, but I do think it's a little bit more repeatable than doing it this way. And you can see one of my tactics there is literally super gluing this beam down to the miter saw there to make the cut. And after I got all these cut, I was pretty sure there was going to be a mistake, and sure enough.
Uh-oh.
What's that? Are we off?
No, just gotta build that tension. Perfect.
Now, these smaller legs that are going to run perpendicular to those longer ones I just cut are going to be significantly easier to make, and mainly because they fall into that spectrum of degrees my miter saw can cut. This is actually just a regular old 45 degree cut, which was kind of a relief after making the medium complicated 62 or 63 degree cut that I did a little while ago. And even though those ones were a little tricky, I knew that I'd be able to make all of these cuts. What I don't know at this point of the build is how am I actually going to attach all of these together so this table is very, very strong? And it doesn't need to be just enough to hold up your dinner. It needs to be enough to hold up somebody jumping or dancing on a table, because God forbid that actually happens. I don't want to get sued.
Perfect.
The best way I could figure out what I needed to do to attach all these legs together was just to get everything mocked into place and then fill in that missing piece, and so I did. I used these 2x4 supports just to make sure those long legs didn't rip the screws out of the mounting plate, and after I had all 4 of them in there, it was actually fairly obvious what I needed to do. I'm gonna mess the name of the shape up, but I believe it's a trapezoid or a parallelogram, or maybe a parallelogram is a trapezoid. Either way, it's 4 sides and the angles are all parallel to each other, just like that one Scott drew right there. Anyway, that was easy enough to cut. It just took a little bit of trial and error, making sure that I got it as tight as possible.
Just take and cut it down.
This next part here might be slightly triggering to a couple fine woodworkers watching this video, but I promise I'm going to change your mind. Just let me explain what I'm doing first. And what I'm doing here is drilling an extra large tapered and countersunk hole for, wait for it, a wood screw. And it actually gets worse than that. It's not just a wood screw, it's a deck screw. And because these are so long, I have to get this really long pilot hole, because if I don't drill a proper sized pilot hole, it'll actually push the wood apart slightly instead of pulling it together. And if you don't know, the reason why this is triggering to some fine woodworkers out there is this fallacy that screws and fine furniture just don't go together. However, if you ask any of those fine craftsmen, almost all of them will say Sam Maloof is one of the greatest woodworkers of the last century. Yet his famous woodworking joint, the Maloof joint, one of the most beautiful joints in all of woodworking, features, wait for it, a screw. And so yes, what I'm saying is I am just as good as Sam Maloof because I'm using deck screws in this table base.
So in theory, we can take the clamps and the supports off, and it should be strong.
Yeah. Looks sturdy.
All right, it'll be stronger when we glue it, but should we
Flip it over.
Easy. Okay.
Wow.
There's actually not really any wiggle. Look how flat it is. How'd that work?
That's incredible.
Oh, what's going on? This is going way too well.
Well, we didn't show how many times I messed up one of those pieces on top.
We did not show that, and we will not show it. Okay, let's admire our work for another minute and then knock this thing out.
I was really pleased with the progress so far, and I wanted to add a couple angles to that center block just to make it look a little cleaner, but I forgot to mark them.
We didn't get the tapers.
Ready to put it back together? Get a practice run?
No.
Do we have another option?
No. All right, well, we'll see how good we are at this.
Even though part of me didn't want to check the height because I was afraid when I reassembled it, everything was thrown off and I'd have to reconfigure everything, the height was actually perfect and I was feeling pretty good. This center section, the fix that I need to make on this block is really just aesthetic. It's not going to affect the structural integrity of anything, but I thought it would look a little bit better not to have a big flat face of end grain poking out to the side. So what I did was I drew a couple of essentially arbitrary lines, and now I'm just using the sander to grind down to those lines, and in the end, I do think this makes it look significantly better, but really only to people that are down on their hands and knees inspecting the underside of the spider base, which when that day comes and they compliment me, this will all be worth it. So far the base sits flat and it looks pretty cool, which is generally good enough for a YouTube video, but if I want to also be able to sell this for around $20,000, it needs to be extraordinarily durable and hold together for the next couple of decades. And here's an additional step that I'm going to take to basically ensure these legs never come apart. I mixed up some Total Boat high performance epoxy, which is a good bonding agent by itself, but then I added a bunch of that silica filler and just a little bit of activated charcoal for color. And if you don't know, this silica filler is the stuff they use for like heavy duty boat repairs, and if you smear it on an object after it cures, it basically feels like you smeared granite all over it, and it provides an incredible bond and also isn't thin, so it won't squeeze out and kind of run down these legs. And this is why it's going to make an excellent bond for these end grain to long grain, long grain to long grain, any type of wood orientation. This stuff will be basically indestructible and rather permanent.
That's actually perfect. That's actually perfect. So one of them is a 1/16 of an inch off, which is what we call perfect for wood.
In the spirit of wildly overbuilding this table base, I'm also going to be adding that same silica filler epoxy to these end grain joints here. And another bonus to using it here is that it won't get sucked down into the wood because it is so much thicker. And I'm sure a lot of you know that this end grain is orientated like a bunch of straws if you look at it under a microscope, and this basically makes it so they're now trying to suck up molasses instead of water. In the years that I've been woodworking, I've probably only had maybe 2 actual bona fide woodworking disasters where the project was so far gone that I couldn't do anything about it and it was essentially a total loss. And both of those disasters came from using wood that was improperly dried or just kind of incompletely dried. And so now I have a rule that no matter who I buy it from or where I buy it, no matter what they tell me, I personally check each slab with my moisture meter. And I use a Wagner Orion. They're kind of the industry standard for moisture meters. And if you want some more information on the one that I have specifically, I'll have a link in the description. All right, I have a confession to make. That last part was at least partially sponsored because I've worked with the Wagner people for years, and prior to starting this build, I reached out to them and I said, hey, I will remind everyone how awesome your product is in my video if you'd be willing to partake in this giveaway. And they're like, well, what do you want? And I was like, I want 2 of your best moisture meters to give to 2 of my viewers. And they just kind of chuckled and said, yeah, that's fine. Then I thought, I really should have asked for more. There is more though, just not more from Wagner, and I'll do better next time. But you might have noticed that the slabs that I'm working on here started out much longer. They were actually almost 15 feet long, but I only really needed about 7 foot for this table. And so I got with Gobi, asked if they wanted to be a part of the giveaway. They said absolutely. So the grand prize of the giveaway that's going on right now is the other half of this book match pair. It's over 7 feet long. It's absolutely stunning. I believe it retails for over $2,000. Gobi is even going to cover domestic shipping with it, so that is going to be the grand prize. We also have those Wagner moisture meters. It's going to be a huge giveaway. If you want some more details on that, there's a link in the description. I'm doing something a bit different on this build. It's something I've never attempted before, and no, I'm not going to be inlaying paper bow ties, although that would be pretty impressive. These paper bow ties are really just to help me visualize the look that I'm going for, because I'm going to leave that 1-inch seam down the middle, and these 2 tops are going to be fastened together mechanically using only bow ties. And Scott was a really big help there with that visual, but this is the overall look that I'm going for. I want to have, I believe it was just 5 bow ties going down the middle, and these will be hopefully strong enough to hold both sides together.
It's buried.
Normally, if you're going to do one of these Dutchman joint or bow tie inlays, I recommend just using wood from the same species, and not just the same species, but the same actual slab of wood, because there is so much variation across trees that it'll just kind of clash if you use wood from a different tree. And I've done a ton of these inlays, and this is almost always the way to go. However, if you want some contrast, I then recommend going with a lot of contrast. And with walnut, that would mean using something like maple for just a really high contrast, and those do look really nice together. The last thing I would recommend normally is to use a dark wood from a different species with walnut. However, that's actually what I'm doing here. This is one of my favorite kind of underrated woods. This is Catalox, also called Mexican Royal Ebony, and this I think is going to look pretty good because I used this in a table a few months ago, loved how it looked, but this is kind of breaking my own rule. There's a few things you can do in life to really trick people into thinking you're more talented than you actually are, and one of my personal favorites involves a piano. And anytime I'm around a piano and people that don't know me that well, I almost always try to repeat this trick, and it usually goes something like I'll walk over and act like I'm just kind of surveying the overall condition of the piano, and maybe hit the pedals a couple times. I'll hit a couple of keys, acting like I can tell if something's in tune. And at this point, people usually kind of start taking notice, like, oh wow, is he actually going to play something? And years ago, maybe even in middle school, I learned to play this one tune. It's like 6 notes. I can play it with one hand, and I usually only get it right about half the time, but if I nail it, it actually sounds like I know how to play the piano, and it usually impresses people. They'll be like, oh wow, you can play piano? And then you got to play it down, just say something like, oh, not for years. And then they'll ask you to play something, just kind of crack your knuckles, stand up, just, no, not today. And anyway, the last time I did this, I was with my sister-in-law, and she was blown away, and she ended up going back to my wife in the other room. She's like, I didn't know Cam could play piano, and my wife's like, yeah, he can't. And then I had to kind of fill her in on what was actually happening there. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that's how I feel about these bow tie inlays. These are not that tricky, but if you can pull it off, which is not that hard, they actually make you look like you're a pretty good woodworker. Some of you watching are probably wondering why I don't just dab a little caulk in there, maybe some joint compound, give it a light sand, and call it a day. And I like your style, but I'm going to try and take this a step further. And luckily, the offcuts from this base hadn't quite made it into the fireplace yet, which they were probably an hour or two out of happening, but these are the pieces that I'm going to use to fill those holes. On the other end of the just fill it with caulk or use joint compound spectrum, we have the people watching that are furious that I used screws at all to attach this wood together, and I do understand your anger, and I do appreciate that you would have preferred that I just seamlessly weld this walnut together, and eventually I hope to get to that level, but for now, I'm just going to use that method from Sam Maloof, who has his pieces displayed in the Smithsonian and the White House, but eventually I will get better than him. I will say that the Maloof joint, from what I've seen, is generally made with contrasting plugs because, like I said earlier, it is really hard to match this walnut with a perfect seamless plug, and I have a quick disclaimer on that here.
All right, I want people to see that this color looks really close right now. If it looks terrible, I did the best I could, and you can't do any better.
All right, I apologize for that. Some of you probably actually can do better, but most of you can't. Anyway, I got these inserted, let the glue cure, got my flush cut saw, and now I was ready to see how I did initially. Although, you're really not going to be able to tell until the finish goes on, and if you have a close eye during the finishing process, you'll be able to see some of these, although this one here looks really good right now anyway. Normally, I don't like using stain or color on really any of my wood pieces if I can help it, and the reason is I feel like it just kind of mutes the color, and I generally tell my customers, just pick a wood species that's the color you want. Don't try to stain oak to make it look like walnut, just get walnut. However, that doesn't really apply when you're dealing with a bunch of different pieces of wood, because this piece here is kind of like putting baseboards in your house, where you're not going to be able to get baseboards that match every single room from the same tree, and this piece here, or this base that I'm building here, actually had pieces from several different trees, which is why I'm adding this color. And I did the same thing on this cabinet that I built maybe a year ago that was made from 300 blocks of wood, and all those blocks of wood came from different pieces, so there was no way I was going to be able to get enough of them to match just perfectly. And the color I'm using here is called English Brown. This is a vesting finish. It's a hard wax oil. It's kind of like a Rubio monocoat, but this is one of those finishes that cures instantly under a UV light. Those bow ties that you saw me put in the tabletop earlier, those were actually only in the underside of the table, so far anyway, because for once, I actually thought ahead, and this is my thought process, is I was afraid if I put all the bow ties in the bottom and the top that there could be just a slight twist between these two pieces of wood and they wouldn't be perfectly level. So what I'm doing here is I have those bow ties securing everything on the bottom. We're going to do 1 or 2 light passes and hopefully square everything up, and actually, after one pass of like a 32nd of an inch, it was perfectly flat, which means there might not have actually been any twist anyway, and this was all completely unnecessary, but I was still proud of myself for thinking about it. Now, I'd left the top a little bit oversized up to this point, just to make sure everything was flat and square before cutting it down to its final size, which was a pretty easy task with this track saw. What's not going to be as easy is adding these bow ties to the top, and I know earlier I said that these bow tie inlays are a way to kind of trick people into thinking you're a better woodworker because they're not that challenging, and they aren't. But what is a little tricky is cutting 5 of these that look absolutely identical, because when you're doing this by hand, there's always just a little bit of variation, and after I got 5 of them cut, I realized this was going to be a bit of a challenge.
All right, so out of 5 that I've cut, I'm happy with 2 of them.
That's good.
These 2 look pretty good. These 3 aren't great. Part of that is because the center is open, and so I want that middle section to be close to perfect as we can get it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can see it on camera, but they're just a little askew. And I cut some extra blanks. I have exactly 3, so I need to go 3 for 3 to match the thickness and everything of those.
Okay.
Piece of cake?
Apparently not.
Fair.
If I didn't go 3 for 3 here, it wasn't going to be the end of the world, but it would just mean I would have to go back and mill a new piece of this catalog to get it to match all those other bow ties, and really didn't want to do that, so I actually paid attention and tried my hardest, and somehow ended up going 3 for 3. Normally, when I'm doing one of these bow tie inlays, I'm putting it across a crack or a void, and I generally just kind of place it arbitrarily where I think that it looks best and functions best. This one is a bit different since there's 5 of them. They all need to be symmetrical, they all need to be evenly spaced and perpendicular to that center section. This took me quite a while to lay everything out, but eventually I got it, and now I'm ready for the fun part, the actual inlay. Here are a couple more gratuitous shots of my Blacktail Studio Damascus marking knife, which if you're curious, is made of 81 layers of Damascus steel hardened to an HRC of 62 and is on a price freeze at least until we sell out of our current inventory. After that, I can't be held responsible. And I know that you have stuff to buy for people in November and December, and you probably won't think about it till then, but if you thought about it now, you could save some money and get somebody something really cool. Anyway, Blacktail Studio Damascus marking knife, there's a link in the description that you should probably just click now. There are a number of ways to make these inlays, and I'm not saying one way is wrong and another way is right, but I will say the way that I do it is correct and any other way is incorrect, and I can prove it because my video guy Scott, he never really did any woodwork before coming to work with me. He's become a bit of a woodworker though now, and he did some of his first bow ties recently, and they look absolutely phenomenal. I'm not just saying that to make him feel better, it's because I see a lot of these inlays and often they look absolutely terrible. So if you follow my steps, they will look just like mine and Scott's, and if you follow anybody else's, I don't know, they might look good, but they also might not. The steps that I take for these inlays is pretty simple. You basically just tape your inlay down using double-sided tape, trace around it with a Damascus marking knife, and yes, it does have to be Damascus. I don't know why, I can't explain it. And then you pop it up, and then you have a nice outline, and then you go in with a router like you saw me do there, and just hog out the majority of the material. Now just get a good sharp chisel and cut right up to your line, and don't take too big of a cut at once because that will kind of compress those wood fibers and round over those edges. Just go about halfway between the line each time until you have no choice but to click it right in there, and this will give you a really, really tight bow tie inlay. I have some pretty exciting news that has been several years in the making, and that is that I finally found, purchased, and actually closed on a property to move my operation to. And yes, I physically own this property now. This did not fall through like the last one, and I gotta say, it's pretty awesome. It's almost a 20-acre farm parcel, and my original plan was to build the ultimate workshop there. And then I got a bid from a contractor for the cost of an ultimate workshop, so instead, I'm going to build the Satisfactory workshop there, but I still think that's going to be pretty cool. So if you're interested in updates on that, make sure you're subscribed over here, and eventually I may even do its own channel over there just to kind of track that shop build out and the old farmhouse restoration and that type of stuff. But I'll make sure to update you all here, so make sure if you're interested, you're subscribed to this channel. If you look close, a couple of these bow ties do not completely bottom out, and that is not by design. A few of these, as I was pounding them in, were just too tight, and I started to have a little bit of a panic attack that if I broke one of these and I had to replace it with a slightly larger one, then I'd have to do that 4 more times. So a couple of them do have a tiny gap underneath, and I'm just gonna have to live with that. Or I guess whoever buys this will have to live with it. I only have to live with it through this video. I am not a fan of drilling into finished pieces of furniture by hand, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to mount this during the building process, so I waited until this point before I drilled my mounting holes, and these are some really nice Forstner bits. They do enable me to drill pretty big holes by hand, and they're made by Fameg. It sounds almost offensive, but they are a really good drill bit anyway. Pretty much all the metal hardware you've seen me use in my tables over the last several years comes from one specific company based out of Canada called Concept 13. They sell the threaded inserts, they sell the bolts, they sell the C-channels, all of that comes from Concept 13. And I haven't talked to the owner Rob in a while, so I don't know how they're doing specifically, but I do know a lot of these Canadian small businesses are really struggling these days with the current economic environment. So if you want to use the same stuff that I use, which I consider to be the best stuff, and support a really great small family-owned business, I would really appreciate it if you checked out Concept 13. And trust me, this is not a sponsored anything. This is just me supporting someone who has supported me with great product over the last several years. Speaking of the C-channels that I often put in my tables, you might be wondering why this table doesn't need them. And truth be told, a lot of my tables probably don't need them. They're just kind of a bonus insurance policy. And a good indicator that this one really didn't need them is the fact that when I took it in to get resurfaced after putting that first series of bow ties in, the fact that it was flattened with one pass at like a 1/32 of an inch really made me think that this wood wasn't going to warp or twist really at all, and that was before any finish went on. So after the finish is on, after it's stabilized, I feel very confident this will stay perfectly flat. For a while now, I have been trying to accurately profile the type of person that gets a certain edge profile on their table, and I just can't put my finger on it, but somebody that would get an edge profile like this nice, clean, sharp 22-degree chamfer, can't be the same person that would get a deep roundover. It's kind of like the person that would buy this car probably also wouldn't buy this one. These bow ties always look pretty terrible after the glue or epoxy cures, and I never really know why. Sometimes I decide to flatten it with a hand plane, and sometimes I use a block plane, and other times I use a belt sander, sometimes I just use the Rotex like I'm using here. Either way, the important thing is just getting them flat without tearing up that surrounding wood, and I knew because these didn't go down all the way, they were going to be plenty tight, and just hoping we didn't have any gaps around the edge, but I think they look pretty good. Now, I know what you're thinking. You are thinking to yourself, Cam, you build flawless furniture. Everything you make is perfectly square and completely flat. Why would you ever possibly need leg levelers? And I do think that is a really good observation you made there, but the problem is I don't build the houses that my tables go into, so I'm adding these heavy-duty leg levelers to ensure that my table overcomes any shortcomings of one of their contractors. And not that I ever just built something flawed like that table I just had to refund the money for, that one with the broken corner, or those bow ties that didn't go all the way in. All the stuff going forward is absolutely perfect though. I do not consider myself to be a very creative person, and I've talked about this before, but I don't feel bad for myself, but I just don't have a ton of original thoughts, and I have found a bit of a loophole though. So if you are also not very creative, but you like to do creative endeavors like woodworking, here's what I've come up with to appear slightly more creative. This base is a good example of how I've kind of hacked my imagination to appear more creative, and that is just to take something made from a different medium and then make it out of wood. And you could do this with this metal table base. You could do it with stained glass. You could do it with stitching, like that one guy that did the copper stitching in the wood. That was a really cool, creative, original idea, but just something he took from a different medium. I did not enjoy the finishing part of this middle section because it was really hard to get an even sheen without it dripping or without it looking too dry right down this center section, but I was surprised at how much I liked this intentional gap. And this is designed to be a dining table, but this did give me an idea for another use for a gap like this, and that is to use it for a conference table. And if you want kind of a low budget cable management system, you could have this gap. You could put unlimited wires down the center and it still looks really deliberate. It doesn't look like there's just loose cables going everywhere, and you don't have to have those really expensive hubs that can only take so many cables at a time. So if you are looking for some kind of cool, deliberate cable management that is on the budget side, I think this could be a cool style.
Table looks dry, but it looks good. How you feeling about it?
Table's okay. I'm trying not to be too dramatic because I was bullied last night on Reddit.
Aw.
I know, it's tough. Somebody had posted a Gobi slab, and then somebody made a joke about like finding some little chipped corner at the end of a project that nobody could notice, then titling the video, "I ruined a slab," and then someone's like, "Is that you, Cam?" And I'm like, it's kind of a good title. So, in the spirit of that, we have a very small, insignificant problem that will need addressing, but by no means is the table ruined. But let me show you what we got. Stressing again that this is something I can fix, and it will not be the thumbnail. Although I think I did say something about a dental pick in the comment. But you see the little hole there, or gap?
Oh yeah.
It's not huge, but I think that would be annoying long term. And what's more annoying is I have to fill that and then sand the whole top again and kind of start over. But it's not a big deal. So we're gonna touch that up, make a very simple fix. I don't edit this to make it look all dramatic and like some shocking face where I don't know what to do and the table's gonna be ruined.
Okay.
The companies that make these hard wax oil finishes often market them saying that they are spot repairable, meaning if you have one damaged area that you need to redo like this, you can just repair this one area and it will blend perfectly with the rest of the table or the rest of the floor. And I have not noticed that to be the case because I have tried several times, and every time I touch up one small area, I get one shiny area that looks completely different than the rest of the table. which is why I'm having to sand the entire tabletop just because this one fairly small little defect that I had to fix. This is a perfect example though of why I love these finishes that cure instantly under the UV light, and I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, but normally each one of these coats takes me 24 hours and then I need to wait 7 days after the final coat. And this one, I do one coat, it cures basically in about 2 minutes as long as it takes me to make those passes with the light. Then I can do another coat, it cures just as fast, and if I find any problems like this, I can fix them the same day and do these additional coats. So it basically costs me no days. It maybe costs me a total of an hour or something. And I do believe that these UV finishes are going to be the future. I think they're absolutely incredible. And if you do any type of woodwork, you need to get on board with these UV finishes. And again, this is not sponsored. This is just something I am very passionate about. And coming from the guy that moves heavy slabs around all summer wearing flip-flops, I might not be the most health conscious, but I do like the fact that these UV finishes also don't contain any solvents, and I don't think anybody could have a problem with that. As you saw earlier, I coated the spider table base with N3 Nano. I'm coating the top, and I'm even coating this center section with N3 Nano. And I feel like in my videos, I'm only ever building new furniture. I'm not like a furniture restoration channel, so it kind of gets lost that N3 Nano isn't just for protecting new furniture. It's maybe even better at restoring used furniture. I bought an old end table and an old coffee table from a lady that was absolutely beat to something, and did several coats of N3 Nano, and I won't say it looked brand new, but it looked almost new just by adding a couple coats of N3 Nano. So if you want some more information on that, there's a link in the video description, or you can click that QR code or scan the QR code. Whatever you do to QR code, you can do that now. My friend and his 9-year-old son came over when I was working on this base, and his son looked at it and described it as, quote, a pair of scissors that are fighting each other, which is unequivocally the best description I've ever had of any of my pieces of furniture for a few reasons. And I will say, this is my favorite table base that I've ever made, and I was shocked at how easy it was to make. And I will say, what gets lost in this whole build is how amazing this top is. Generally, this would be the feature part of this table, not this table base, but I do think that the base does steal the show. And don't forget, if you want to enter the giveaway to win the sister slabs to these and try to build this same type of top, or maybe even cooler, there is a link in the description. And also, if you want to buy this table, there's a link in the description for that. There's probably just a lot of links. If you need anything, just go down there. Also, thank you for watching. I appreciate it.
Feel solid?
It's pretty good. It'll tip if I get to the edge, so I'm doing a little misleading advertising. But it's actually not bad.
Yeah.